Now, I know it's been a while, but you guys don't understand how hyped I am for the structure deck to be released. For those who don't know, the spell counter Endymion structure deck was actually my reintroduction point into Yu-Gi-Oh! Around 2008-2009. And ever since the concept of Structure Deck R was introduced, I was waiting patiently for the day they would get back to this deck and remake it for the modern age. And needless to say, there are some rough points, but overall, I can't say I'm disappointed. I'm very happy with what we have so far. At this point, the deck is feeling mostly complete. However, it just needs 2, maybe 3 more cards, and with Rogue of Endymion coming up as a V-Jump promo, and possible new support cards coming in the set after Dane, plus at least 1, maybe 2 cards unrevealed in the structure deck, it should get there, and it should feel much more complete by the time we get it here in the TCG. So, in order to understand the archetype as a whole, I think it's fair to start with Magical Citadel of Endymion. Magical Citadel of Endymion allows you to put a spell counter on it each time a spell card resolves, and if a card with spell counters on the field is destroyed, transfer the spell counters from that card to this card. And once per turn, you can pay the cost of any card that uses spell counters by taking them off this card instead. This is going to become very important with how certain cards such as Magister and Servant interact with themselves and interact with spell counters. Additionally, if this card would be destroyed, you could remove 1 spell counter from it instead. I think it goes without saying, you run 3, you run 2 terraforming, and you want to see this every game as early as possible. Next up, I want to bring up a trio of Endymion monsters that have similar effects, but have wildly different applications. Servant of Endymion, Magister of Endymion, and Empress of Endymion. Each of these cards share a pendulum effect, or rather part of a pendulum effect, with one another, so let's just go over that right now. So, each time a spell card is activated, place 1 spell counter when that card resolves. You can remove 3 spell counters from this card to gain one of the appropriate effects. Servant special summons itself and 1 monster from your main deck that has 1000 or more attack points and you can place spell counters on. Magister special summons itself and 1 monster from your face-up extra deck that you can place spell counters on. And finally, Empress special summons itself and 1 monster from your hand that you can place spell counters on. With all these cards as well, as soon as you special summon both it and its appropriate target, place 1 spell counter on each of those cards. Where these cards had a similar pendulum effect, all their monster effects are relatively different and diverse. However, one thing to note is that they share the effect that you can only summon 1 copy of themselves per turn. To start off again with Servant, Servant states that during your opponent's turn, quick effect, you can discard 1 card, place a counter on all of your cards that you can place spell counters on. And if this card is destroyed, put it into your pendulum zone and transfer the amount of spell counters it had on itself to itself. And if Servant has any spell counters on it, it can attack directly. Magister states that when this card declares an attack, you could place 1 spell counter on it. And once per opponent's turn quick effect, you can remove 3 spell counters from your field, special summon 1 monster that you can place spell counters from your deck. It also shares the destroyed effect where it transfers itself to the pendulum zone and transfers its spell counters back onto itself. Finally, we have Empress, which states when this card is special summoned, you can target 1 other card you control with spell counters on it, and 1 card your opponent controls, return both targets to the hand, and then any spell counters that were on the card, transfer them to this card. If this card has any spell counters on it and is destroyed by battle, add 1 Endymion card from your deck to your hand. Now that was a whole lot to basically say that Servant is your starter, Magister is your extender, and Empress is our rank 7 material. I run 3 Servant, 3 Magister, and 1 Empress, because even though, yes, you could do a Magister into an Empress on your opponent's turn in order to return 1 card from their field to their hand, I just don't feel like it's worth it that much. And in addition, you'd rather be using a Magister on your field to go into Bamboozling Gossip Shadow along with, say, a Servant or another copy of itself. I could see an argument to run at least 2 Empress, but any more than that I feel is way too cloggy, and yes, even though it does kind of suck to lose it to Xyz material and never be able to recover it, ultimately it really doesn't do that much for the deck because the deck has no problem with spewing out its hand via pendulum summoning. Final note is when you special summon using Magister's effect, you have to have either your EMZ opened up or a arrow pointing down somewhere where you can special summon that monster. And since that monster is being treated as summoned from the extra deck, spoiler alert, it helps us make Zephyr Metaltron. Now then, for the final monster in our first little block of cards, we have Endymion, the Founding Sorcerer Supreme. Pendulum effect states you could remove 6 counters from your field and special summon this card from your Pendulum Zone, then destroy cards on the field up to the number of cards you control that you can place spell counters on. So that means when you special summon this from your Pendulum Zone, you have to minimum destroy 1 card. That might include your own card, just so you know. Then, if you do, place spell counters on this card equal to the number of cards destroyed. You could only use this effect of Endymion once per turn. Onto its monster effect, once per turn when a spell trap card or its effect is activated, quick effect, you can return 1 card you control with spell counters to your hand, and if you do, negate that activation and destroy that card. Then, place spell counters on this card equal to the number of spell counters that were on the return card. Your opponent cannot target this card with spell counters with card effect. Also, it cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. When this card with spell counters is destroyed by battle, you could add any normal spell card from your deck to your hand. Shout out to Mr. Longest Text in the whole card game here, actually living up to the hype. It special summons itself with pretty consistent results, and it's an Omni Negate for spell and trap card. In addition, you really can easily get this thing out thanks to the likes of Magister or Servant, and even if you can't necessarily get it out with either of those two, you can search it out with Electromite and just Pendulum Summon it. The only real downside to this guy is when he's actually in your hand and you want to start actually going off, he really doesn't do much. So run 2, maybe 3 if you're feeling a bit bold. Even I tend to flip-flop on this. Now that we're all done talking about the Endymion lineup, let's move on to our other spell counter friends, the Mythical Beasts, aka the deck's equivalent of be careful of who you called ugly in high school. Mythical Beast Master Cerberus has an effect which allows you to, when you have no other cards in your other Pendulum Zone, destroy this card and add 1 level 7 or lower Mythical Beast effect monster from your deck to your hand. And for its monster effect, it adds 2 spell counters each time a spell card resolves. It cannot be destroyed by effects when it has 4 spell counters on it, and once per turn during your turn, you could remove 4 spell counters from your field, target 1 monster your opponent controls, banish it face up, and then this card gains attack equal to the banished monster's original attack until the end of your opponent's next turn. Now, despite the fact that he does have an awkward level, an awkward scale, and really isn't too useful with playing around your opponent's stuff, he is an OTK machine in a sense, and his main purpose here is to get us to our next card. Now, Mythical Beast Jackal King has an effect very similar where if you have no other cards in your Pendulum Zone, you can destroy this card and special summon 1 face-up Mythical Beast Pendulum monster from your extra deck except for itself. And its monster effect is the real star of the show here because each time a spell is activated, you get 2 spell counters, and once per turn when an opponent's monster activates an effect, quick effect, remove 2 spell counters from your field, negate the activation, and destroy that card. So in an ideal world, you'll set Master Cerb, destroy it, get Jackal, set Jackal, destroy it, special summon your Master Cerb, get any other Pendulum monster that you can onto the field, bring out Electromite, search whatever, and just go on from there. Then later on in the turn, you'll re-Pendulum summon back Jackal King, and that way you have a nice beefy negate, and if you're lucky, maybe get out a second Jackal King, that way you get 2 negates. 3 Master Cerb and 2 Jackal King has been working out really well for myself, and you also have the option to play some of the other mythical beasts. However, I found them to be not as ideal. The only one I say that you really have to try to focus on packing in there would be to get 1 copy of Garuda. Garuda allows you to pop a spell and trap card zone, again if it's the only card in your Pendulum Zone, and I mean, who doesn't love a girl with searchable MST? Additionally, it's a level 4, so it's rank 4 fodder. Oh, and if you have Garuda in your hand, it's basically Kirin. Finally, we have our last block of monsters, which is the Darkworm engine. So we play 3 Supreme King Darkworm in order to dump it as fast as we can in order to special summon it, because it acts as a free body and an easy way to get half of our materials for heavy metal foes Electromite. 1 Supreme King Gate 0, it acts solely as a low scale and another rank 7 material. That's literally all it does. And finally, since we're dumping dragons into the graveyard, we may as well play Destrudo. So, Destrudo, as most of you know, allows you to special summon it from your hand or grave by paying half your life points and targeting 1 level 6 or lower monster you control. And then you reduce this guy's level by that targeted monster's amount. So you'll always get a level 7 synchro out of it. Additionally, thanks to his pretty convenient level of 7, we can also just Pendulum summon him and then use him as a rank 7 material. Now, beyond Citadel and of course terraforming to go along with it, we run a few other spells. So let's take a look at those right now. First up, we have Spell Power Control, which lets us add an Endymion card directly from our deck to our hand, and then place spell counters on the field equal to the number of Spell Power Controls and Spell Power Grasps on your field or in the graveyard. What more is there to say? This is an objectively perfect card for this deck. It gets us our Endymion cards, and it gets us spell counters on field. Next up, we got Mythical Institution, which states each time a Mythical Beast Pendulum monster is destroyed, we get to place 2 counters onto this card. Once per turn, we could remove any number of counters from anywhere on our field and add a Pendulum monster from either our deck or face-up extra deck with a level equal to the number of removed spell counters. If this card would be destroyed, you can instead remove a spell counter on it. What can I say? It's just good consistency boosting. After that, we got 3 Potted Desires. Simple, put spell counters on boards. Lets us dig a little deeper. As you can see, we tend to play a lot of 3-ofs. It's good. We play Dragon Shrine just to get our Dark Worm or Destrudo into the graveyard. Nothing fancy there. 1 Foolish Burial for the same purpose. And finally, 1 Upstart Goblin because spell counter generation. Now, due to the fact we still have unrevealed cards in this archetype, I want to just focus on the key components of the extra deck rather than cover the whole thing. I'll include a sample extra deck at the end, but for now, let's just cover the most important cards. Starting off, we have Heavy Metal Foes Electromite. Now, Electromite is basically here as a searcher and a easy draw, but how do you go about making it in this deck, I hear you ask? Well, ideally, you'll dump Dark Worm, special summon Dark Worm, search a gate 0, normal summon another card, or use Jackal King in order to bring out a Master Serb, and then link into this, dump whatever you want into your face-up extra deck, put down the gate 0, destroy the gate 0, get the card back from your extra deck, and get a draw off. Now, Electromite has some really nice arrows, but let's improve that. Zephyr Metaltron requires 2+ monsters special summon from the extra deck, and it's a fat link 3 with 3 down pointing arrows. These arrows really allow us to make a huge pendulum summon compared to what we normally would be able to do with just Electromite, and allows us to really keep our options open. In addition, because of its requirements, we have multiple ways of making it. Now then, the 2 most common ways you'll make Metaltron is by either using Magister's Effect to special summon another Pendulum monster from your X deck, using that plus Electromite and linking into Zephyr Metaltron, or making Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon, linking Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon with Metal Foes Electromite, and then getting Zephyr Metaltron plus Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon. And while we're on the topic, yes, we're running the full Odd Eyes package here, so 1 Absolute Dragon, 1 Meteor Burst, and 1 Vortex. With Meteor Burst, when you do make it off of using Destrudo as your tuner, you could bring down, say, Empress of Endymion that you may have put in your Pendulum Zone and overlay those 2 in order to make a rank 7. Absolute Dragon is solely here to be used as link material and then go into Vortex Dragon, and Vortex Dragon's just a good Omni Negate. Moving to some of our lower ranks, we have 1 Bamboozling Gossip Shadow, because you could overlay it using 2 Servants or 2 Magisters or any combination of them in order to get just 1 more monster negate, essentially. And Abyss Dweller, because even though it's a bit hard to make because you'll probably end up using either 2 Dark Worm or Dark Worm Garuda if you do so choose to run Garuda, it can be a blowout against certain decks. Finally, for our last card that I feel you definitely need to include in any Endymion extra deck, that is Daybreaker, the Splendid Magical Knight. It requires 2 spellcaster monsters, and when it's link summoned, place 1 spell counter on it. It gets 300 attack for each spell counter on it, and you can only use each of the following effects of Daybreaker once per turn. So, if a spellcaster monster is summoned to a zone this card points to, place 1 spell counter on this card, and you could remove 2 spell counters from this card, then target 1 card on the field, destroy it. Compared to most of the other cards in this deck, this is pretty vanilla, all things considered. But it's mandatory, I feel, and I mean, it still has decent zones, and just spot removal is nice, especially when Arcanite Magician is a little out of reach sometimes. Here's what the rest of my extra deck looks like. As you can see, nothing too special. And once again, due to the nature of there being a lot of unrevealed cards, consider this part 1 of 2. I'm going to show off one replay where I make a pretty significant board, and the board I feel is arguably the best this deck can make in its current condition. And once the rest of the deck is revealed, we'll update the deck, and then I'll show off a lot of the replays. Thank you all again so much for watching. Look forward to part 2. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys later.